He said it on camera, calmly, the way a man says something he has already made peace with. "If they come," he said, "it will not end well for us." The clip went viral. The warning did not. Because we filed it under science fiction. We laughed at the image of tripods and death rays. And in doing that, we missed the actual sentence. Hawking was not afraid of invasion. He was afraid of what their existence would prove. And this year, Webb sent back an image that lines up with the exact scenario he described. It is not a headline yet. It should be. Wherever you are watching this from, take a second before we go further. Because the story you think you know about Stephen Hawking and aliens is the wrong story. It has been the wrong story for over a decade. The public kept the cartoon version. The scientific version was quieter, harder, and more specific. He was not warning us about a fleet arriving in the sky. He was warning us about a probability calculation, and the calculation only becomes terrifying when the silence breaks. For most of human history, we had no way to check. We looked up, saw dark, and told ourselves the dark meant emptiness. That was never true. The dark only ever meant that our instruments were too weak to hear anything back. Every generation confused the limit of its tools with the shape of reality. And every generation, when the tools improved, discovered that the sky had been full the entire time. Full of planets, full of galaxies, full of structures we had not been able to resolve. The pattern is consistent. The pattern is not comforting. Webb was built to push that limit further than any instrument before it. Not just further in distance, further in a specific kind of vision. Infrared, heat. The one thing no process in the universe can hide, because thermodynamics does not permit hiding. Living things leak heat. Machines leak heat. Cities leak heat. Any civilization advanced enough to matter would leak heat on a scale visible across light years to the right instrument. Webb is that instrument. And in a specific patch of sky, Webb is now returning readings that do not fit any natural template we have. That is the sentence that should be everywhere. It is not. And the reason it is not is the reason this video exists. The image Webb captured this year is the exact kind of signal Hawking said we should be terrified to find. And we found it anyway. You have almost certainly heard about it already. You just did not hear it the way it was written. The press release used the word intriguing. It used the phrase worth further study. It described the anomalous infrared sources as candidates for follow-up observation. It included the standard caution that natural explanations remain the leading hypothesis. This is the language of institutional science, and it is the language that trained you, over decades of similar releases, to move on to the next tab. Now read the preprint. The preprint uses different words. It uses unresolved. It uses inconsistent with known stellar populations. It uses waste heat signature within the parameter space of a Type II civilization. That last phrase is not a joke, and it is not a leak. It is a category from the Kardashev scale, which is a real classification system used in real astrophysics papers, and it appears in the discussion section of a real observation. The public version softened it. The scientific version did not. This is not a scandal. It is a mechanism. Agencies file press releases through communications offices whose job is to prevent panic, protect funding, and manage the narrative window until follow-up data arrives. That is a rational system. It has a failure mode. The failure mode is that real anomalies, once translated into the calm dialect of the press office, become indistinguishable from routine observations. And once they look routine, they get treated as routine. And once they are treated as routine, the news cycle moves on. Notice how quickly this story disappeared. Notice that you probably scrolled past it. Notice that if a friend mentioned it to you at dinner, you would already be reaching for a phrase like, "They always find something like that," or "They will figure out what it really is." That reflex is not skepticism. That reflex is the softening working exactly as designed. Hawking predicted this reflex specifically. He said the danger was not that we would fail to detect. The danger was that we would detect and shrug. Ask yourself, honestly, where you were when you first heard about this image. On a phone, between other headlines, framed as science curiosity. Did any part of you sit with it? Or did the packaging tell you it was not the kind of story that required sitting with? The packaging was the point. The packaging is always the point. And once you see the gap between what was published in the paper and what was translated for the public, you cannot unsee it. To understand why the calm response is the wrong response, you have to understand what Webb was actually built to see. Every telescope before Webb was, in a specific sense, half-blind. They were built to see light in the visible range, the same narrow band your eyes use, or in adjacent bands where hot young stars and violent events glow brightly. That is a useful range. It is also a range in which a civilization can, in principle, hide. Turn off your radio transmitters. Aim your lasers away from Earth's line of sight. Do not build anything that flashes. And an optical telescope will slide right past you. Infrared is different. Infrared is heat, and heat is the one currency in the universe that cannot be refused. The second law of thermodynamics is not a suggestion. It is not a soft trend that clever engineering can root around. It states that any process which does work, any process which computes, any process which sustains a living cell or spins a turbine or runs a data center must release energy as low-grade heat. There is no exception. There is no technology, however advanced, that avoids this. A civilization a million years ahead of us obeys this rule. A civilization a billion years ahead of us obeys this rule. If they are doing anything at all, they are glowing in the infrared. Freeman Dyson worked this out in 1960. He proposed that a sufficiently advanced civilization would eventually build structures around its star to capture its energy, and that such structures would radiate the captured energy back into space as waste heat at a specific infrared wavelength. He did not propose this as science fiction. He proposed it as a search strategy. If they exist, and if they are doing what physics forces them to do, look for the infrared excess. Look for stars that appear too dim in visible light and too bright in the infrared. Look for the fingerprint of thermodynamics doing its job on a civilizational scale. Think about what that means. Think about it as a hunting problem. Imagine trying to find a person hiding in a dark forest at night. Your eyes will fail, but a thermal camera will show you a human-shaped glow between the trees because a body cannot stop being warm. Webb is the thermal camera. The forest is the galaxy, and the glow, if it is there, cannot be turned off. 60 years of searches with weaker instruments found ambiguous candidates. Tabby's star. A handful of infrared excesses in Fermilab and Penn State surveys. Enough to stay interested, not enough to conclude. Webb changed the resolution of the search by an order of magnitude, and in one specific patch of sky, Webb is now returning readings that do not match any known natural process. For 50 years, the Fermi Paradox has been used as a comfort. Enrico Fermi, over lunch in Los Alamos in 1950, asked the famous question: if the galaxy is old and stars are common and life is plausible, then where is everybody? The silence, the absence of visible neighbors, was treated by generations of thinkers as evidence of absence. Maybe life is rare. Maybe intelligence is rare. maybe we really are alone. That interpretation felt like modesty. It was not modesty. It was a category error. The silence was never evidence of absence. The silence was evidence of our detection limits. Those two sentences look similar. They are not similar. One says the room is empty. The other says our ears are bad. And every time the ears improved, the room got louder. Consider the exoplanet count. In 1992, the number of confirmed planets outside our solar system was 2. 2. In 1995, we confirmed the first one orbiting a Sun-like star. By 2010, the count was in the hundreds. By 2020, it had crossed 4,000. As of last year, it sits above 5,600 confirmed, with tens of thousands more candidates awaiting confirmation. That is not a discovery curve. That is the sound of an instrument threshold breaking and the sky filling in behind it. Now apply the same logic to intelligence. Breakthrough Listen, the largest technosignature search program in history, has produced null results across thousands of nearby stars. That sounds like emptiness. Read the fine print. The null results apply to a specific range of transmitter powers at specific frequencies aimed roughly in our direction during the brief windows we happen to be listening. Outside those parameters, the search says nothing. It cannot say anything. It was not built to. The Drake equation, after every major post-Kepler revision, has been pushed in one direction only: upward. More habitable planets than we thought, more biosignature candidates than we thought, more time on the cosmic clock than we thought. Every variable that got measured got worse for the empty universe hypothesis. Here is the part that should bother you. For decades, we told ourselves that if they were out there, we would know. That sentence was never true. The true sentence was that if they were out there in a form our weakest instruments could catch, we would know. Different sentence. Different implication. And Webb is not our weakest instrument. Webb is the first instrument that could actually check. And when the ears get better, the room gets louder. People imagine finding aliens as a discrete event, a single confirmed signal, a single detection, a one-off headline that adjusts the worldview slightly and then life goes on. That is not how detection thresholds work. That has never been how detection thresholds work. Here is the math nobody wants to do out loud. If Webb has caught the infrared signature of one civilization, in one patch of sky, within one small slice of one galaxy, and if we take seriously the principle that Earth's viewpoint is not privileged, then the statistical implication is not one. The statistical implication is many, possibly thousands, possibly more. This is called the Copernican principle. It is the same logic that told us the Earth is not the center of the solar system, the Sun is not the center of the galaxy, and the Milky Way is not the center of the universe. Applied to detection, it says something simple and hard. If you find one, in the small volume you happen to look at, the volume you did not look at is almost certainly full of them. Sandberg and Bostrom formalized this in a 2018 paper titled Dissolving the Fermi Paradox. Their argument, compressed, was that our uncertainty about the variables in the Drake equation is so wide that the probability distribution allows for wildly different answers. A galaxy nearly empty. A galaxy densely inhabited. The point was not that one answer is correct. The point was that the moment we get real data, the distribution collapses. And the direction it collapses matters. Webb has now supplied a data point. One anomalous infrared source. If it holds up, the distribution does not collapse toward we are one of two. The distribution collapses toward we are one of many, because a random survey of a random patch does not find the only example on the first try. Compare the exoplanet curve again. In 1992, we knew of two. Nobody thought that number would stay at 2, and it did not. It exploded. Every detection technology follows the same curve, because the first detection is not evidence of rarity. It is evidence that the instrument crossed a threshold. The second detection follows quickly, then the third, then hundreds. Then the field is redefined. Now think about what that means. It means the first confirmed technosignature is not the end of the search. It is the leak in the dam. Which means Hawking's actual fear was never about whether we would find them. It was about what happens on the day after. The threat is not an invasion fleet. The threat has never been an invasion fleet. That framing survives in the culture because it is easy to picture and because it lets us keep the story at safe emotional distance. The real threat is smaller and more immediate. It is a Tuesday morning. Imagine the confirmation lands at 7:45 in the morning, local time, on a weekday. A press conference streamed from Baltimore or Pasadena, a single sentence read off a piece of paper by someone whose voice is trying very hard to stay level. We have detected, and independently confirmed, an artificial infrared signature consistent with a Type II civilization. Then the questions. Then the phone in your pocket. Now think about what happens in your day. Your employer does not have a policy for this. Your bank does not have a policy for this. Your child's school does not have a policy for this. Your religious tradition, whatever it is, has spent centuries elaborating an answer to a question that has just been reframed. The working assumptions of every institution you interact with were built on the premise that we were, functionally, alone. That premise is now retired. And no one has drafted the replacement. In 1960, the Brookings Institution delivered a report to NASA titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Inside was a section on the societal impact of discovering extraterrestrial life. The section is short. It concluded that such a discovery could, in principle, destabilize human societies, particularly those whose belief systems and self-understanding were most tightly organized around human uniqueness. It recommended further study. Further study was not funded. Historical analogues are not perfect, but they are the only tool we have. When two civilizations on Earth made contact after long isolation, the smaller and less technologically dense one did not usually adapt. It usually collapsed. Not through violence alone, through the erosion of internal coherence. Beliefs stopped explaining the world. Structures stopped organizing life. The center did not hold. Now scale that to a species, not a culture, a species. Every human alive, receiving the same reframing signal within the same 24-hour window, with no institutional buffer and no rehearsed response. Markets would move first. Markets always move first. Then governments. Then the ordinary people who work inside both. What Hawking understood, and what the cheerful framing keeps missing, is that the danger is not what the aliens do. The danger is what we do to ourselves in the first 72 hours. And this is the part where the official channels stop talking, because there is no playbook for the next 72 hours. There is a document. It is called the Declaration of Principles Concerning the Conduct of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It was drafted in 1989 by the International Academy of Astronautics. It was revised in 2010. It is 9 pages long. It is the closest thing humanity has to a protocol for the day after. It is not a treaty. It is not binding. It has no enforcement mechanism. It contains language like, the discoverer should inform all other signatories, and no response should be sent until appropriate international consultations have taken place. The word should appears repeatedly. The word shall does not. Signatories are voluntary. Non-signatories, which include most governments, are not obligated to anything at all. Read that sentence again. The framework for how humanity handles the most consequential piece of information it could ever receive is a voluntary declaration written before the modern internet existed. Before social media, before smartphones, before a single citizen with a Twitter account could break the story of the century faster than any consultation could occur. Compare this to how humanity handled other threshold discoveries. Nuclear fission produced the Manhattan Project, then the Atomic Energy Commission, then the International Atomic Energy Agency, then the Non-Proliferation Treaty, then decades of arms control scaffolding involving inspectors, sanctions, and hotlines between capitals. Genetic modification produced the Asilomar Conference and a lattice of national biosafety regulations. Even artificial intelligence, in its current adolescent phase, has produced executive orders, EU legislation, and international summits. Imperfect frameworks. But frameworks. First contact planning has a PDF and a handshake. The chain of custody, if Webb's anomalous signature crossed the confirmation threshold tomorrow, would not run through the United Nations. It would run through a small group of astronomers at institutions in Maryland, Arizona, and Germany. Then a call to the funding agencies. Then a call to national governments, which are under no obligation to coordinate with each other, and every incentive to leak first. The declaration says they should not. The declaration cannot make them not. Now widen the frame. The economic infrastructure that would absorb the news is globally interconnected in a way it has never been for a shock of this magnitude. Supply chains that assume stable consumer behavior. Financial systems that assume stable long-term expectations. Governments whose legitimacy assumes a stable frame of reference for what matters. None of these systems has been stress-tested against an information shock that reframes the species. The people who wrote the protocol assumed governments would cooperate. Hawking assumed they wouldn't. There is a specific dialect that agencies speak when the underlying finding is more disruptive than the public is ready for. You have heard it, you just did not know it was a dialect. It uses words like intriguing. It uses worth further study. It uses cannot yet rule out natural explanations. It uses the leading hypothesis remains. Each phrase is technically accurate. Each phrase is also, in aggregate, a strategy. The strategy is called managed disclosure, though nobody in the field calls it that out loud. It is not a conspiracy. It is a professional norm. Scientists who overclaim get punished by their peers, by their funders, and by history. Scientists who underclaim are considered rigorous. The incentive gradient runs one direction only, and press offices, whose job is to translate scientist caution into public consumable language, tilt the gradient further. By the time an anomalous finding reaches your phone, it has passed through 3 layers of professionally rewarded softening. Consider the ALH 84001 meteorite in 1996. NASA announced possible evidence of ancient microbial life on Mars. The word possible did a lot of work in that sentence. Within 2 years, alternative explanations were being emphasized. Within 5 years, the finding had drifted into the probably not but interesting category, where it still sits. It has never been definitively refuted. It has simply been out-narrated by other stories. Consider the WOW signal in 1977, a narrow-band radio burst 72 seconds long from the direction of Sagittarius at a frequency close to the hydrogen line, which is exactly the frequency any physicist would predict for interstellar communication. Never explained, never repeated. Handled with such institutional calm that most people under 40 have never heard of it. Consider Tabby's star, Catalog designation KIC 8462852. In 2015, its light curve showed dips so irregular and deep that one credentialed astronomer, Jason Wright, publicly floated the possibility of an alien megastructure. Within 18 months, the narrative had shifted to dust cloud, probably. The dust cloud hypothesis has real support. It also has real gaps. The gaps stopped getting covered. Notice the pattern. Probably natural is not a conclusion. It is a holding pattern. And the holding pattern is where anomalies go to be forgotten. You have almost certainly already heard about Webb's anomalous readings and already filed them under "they'll figure it out." That reflex is the softening working exactly as designed. But Hawking's warning wasn't about one image. It was about what one image would mean for everything we thought we understood about our place in the universe. Hawking's real argument was never about aliens. It was about a wall. A statistical wall standing somewhere between the emergence of life and the persistence of intelligence at a scale large enough for us to detect. Economist Robin Hanson gave the wall its name in 1996. He called it the Great Filter. The logic is austere. Life on Earth appears to have emerged relatively quickly after the planet cooled. Multicellular life took longer. Intelligence took much longer. Technological civilization took very recently. If we plot these steps as a probability curve, and if we then look at the observable universe and see, so far, no clear evidence of other civilizations, one of two things must be true. Either the filter is behind us, meaning one of the earlier steps was catastrophically improbable and we somehow crossed it. Or the filter is ahead of us, meaning intelligent civilizations reliably arise and then reliably fail before becoming detectable. Or shortly after. Which one is true matters enormously. If the filter is behind us, we are the survivors of a lottery that most planets do not win, and the sky ahead is open. If the filter is ahead of us, we are approaching an obstacle that has stopped every other civilization that reached this point. Nick Bostrom, the Oxford philosopher, wrote a follow-on argument in 2008 with a title that summarizes the whole discipline. Where are they? Why I hope the search for extraterrestrial life finds nothing. His reasoning was that every piece of evidence for life beyond Earth increases the probability that the filter is ahead of us rather than behind us. Simple microbes on Mars would be bad news. Complex life on an exoplanet would be worse. A confirmed technosignature from an active civilization would be, in Bostrom's framing, the worst news humanity could receive. Not because of what they might do to us, because of what their existence, combined with the silence we thought we heard, would imply about our future. Hawking said in 2016 that humanity had perhaps 1,000 years to become a multi-planet species before an existential scale risk became decisive. He was not being poetic, he was doing filter math. Every technological threshold we have crossed, fire, agriculture, industry, fission, artificial intelligence, has arrived faster than the wisdom to hold it. There is no reason to assume other civilizations were spared the same timing problem. There is every reason to assume most of them failed it. The silence, if it breaks now, does not answer the old question. It replaces it with a worse one. What stops the others? Which brings us back to the image. Webb is still pointed at that patch of sky. The photons still arrive. The infrared signature, whatever it turns out to be, is still under review by teams whose job is to be careful, and who will be careful, and whose care will be translated into calm public language by the same machinery that has translated every previous anomaly. Follow-up observations are scheduled. Alternative explanations are being modeled. The paper is in preprint. The press release is polite. Nothing is confirmed, nothing is denied. Let me be clear about what this video is not saying. It is not saying that Webb has confirmed extraterrestrial intelligence. It has not. It is not saying that scientists are hiding anything. They are not. It is not saying that Hawking's warnings were prophecy. They were arguments made from data, subject to revision. It is not saying that the anomalous infrared source has no natural explanation. It may. What this video is saying is smaller and harder. The interpretive frame most people carry into stories like this is too soft for the physics involved. The reflex to file the story under "they'll figure it out" is the reflex Hawking spent the last years of his life trying to warn against. Not because the reflex is stupid, because the reflex is trained. Trained by decades of press releases that softened everything. Trained by the professional norms of a scientific community that punishes overclaim and rewards caution. Trained by a culture that prefers the cartoon version of a warning because the cartoon version can be safely dismissed. Hawking's actual sentence, read now the way he meant it, was this: "The moment we find them, we will learn something about ourselves that we are not prepared to hear. That our silence was not special. That our survival is not guaranteed. That the calm framing we prefer is the exact posture that gets civilizations killed." Here is the one narrow piece of hope he left us with. He believed the filter could be shifted forward, not by force, not by technology alone, but by attention. By taking seriously the arguments we currently prefer to ignore. By responding to the physics before the physics forces the response. That is the reason to keep looking. That is the reason to keep reading past the press release. That is the reason this video exists. Webb is still gathering photons that left their source before humans existed. Some of those photons carry information the universe has been trying to hand us for a very long time. He warned us. We laughed. The image arrived anyway.